Hey guys, Rock Guy here, doing our first new video in a while. A different video for the channel. We're going to be doing a tier list, our very first tier list. And for this list, I thought we'd do 2020 albums. Pretty much all the albums I talked about in my best of, okay, and worst of videos, but in a much more condensed format for anyone who doesn't want to sit through 30 minutes to basically an hour of me rambling. So again, one thing I want to stress, or a couple points I want to make before we start, is I'm only talking about albums I listen to. I'm not gonna discuss anything that I didn't play, so if you're wondering why I didn't cover one specific album, these are only the albums I checked out, only the albums I looked twice at. Pretty much just the records that I was most interested or had the most investment in. And two is the actual ranking. It's going to be a little different from your usual tier lists, or just a little bit, not too much. So as you see, we've got S tier. S tier is basically something that I find totally perfect. I see no fault in this record. It's something I consider one of the best albums of all time. And it's pretty much just, yeah, one of the best albums I've heard of the entire year. This is going to hold true for the subsequent years. I'm going to do one on 2021 next week. And I think S tier should be reserved. It's going to be very rare. I don't use it very often. In fact, as of now, from 2020 to 2022, I only use it one time, which is something you'll see almost immediately. Secondly, A tier is going to be almost perfect. Something that was really good, something that I think adds a lot to the decade, or added a lot to that year. But maybe it just didn't resonate with me as strongly as the S tier record did, you know? Just, most of the albums I've listened to are in A tier. Most of them are really good. It's just, you know, S tier is special. B tier is mostly good. Something that generally has an overall vibe I like, where I like most of the songs. But it's not quite S or A. It's just pretty good. C tier is something that I think is okay. Just, yeah. Not much to say for that. It has its bright moments, but overall it's not on the same level as the previous three tiers. D tier is disappointing. Now, disappointing doesn't necessarily mean bad. I'm not saying anything in this level is terrible. It's just not up to the standards I was expecting or hoping for. F tier is obvious. This is just hot garbage, and if you have kept up with me since 2020, you're probably already aware of what albums are going to be in F tier. And NP is not played. So this is just kind of a reminder to me to listen to these albums eventually. There's some albums I just never got around to checking out for whatever reason or another. And I still feel they deserve some recognition, even if I haven't played them. It doesn't mean I haven't played them because they're bad or they're not good. It just means I haven't played them because I just never made the time to do so. Now that that's out of the way, let's just jump straight into the albums. So, these are also going to go in chronological order. Pretty much the order these albums were released is how they'll be presented on the tier list. And kicking 2020 off was Poppy with I Disagree. Now, this record's pretty sweet because it's one of the only examples of rock music evolving I've heard this entire decade. I'm going to put it in A tier, mainly because I think it's a really good record. The record itself is also very ominous, especially with the closer track, Don't Go Outside, which pretty much predicted what's going to happen for the rest of 2020, which was, you know, catastrophic disaster. But it's very intense, it's very dark. It's one of the few albums that blends electronic and rock music very well. I think that's a style a lot of people attempt, even though it's not always the most lucrative or successful style. A lot of bands have attempted to go electronic to only reach catastrophic failure, but Poppy didn't. I think this record is one of the best examples of rock music evolving. Or actually, I think as of now, I would say this is the best example of rock music evolving this decade. Only one other band made something on the level of this one. But yeah, it's really good. It's my favorite Poppy album as of now. Still holds true. I think she takes all the things that made Am I a Girl sweet and just expanded upon them to make an even better, more intense, more sinister album. I love this record. If you are yearning for new rock music, you should absolutely check it out. So yeah, we're going to put that one in A tier. Following that, we got the sophomore album by Lola Marsh, what many people dubbed Israel's answer to Lana Del Rey, is in fact a very good album, a very beautiful record. And I know in many ways I really just approached Lola Marsh because of their similarities to Lana Del Rey. But at this point in time, I get a lot more out of their music than I do out of Lana Del Rey's music, and it's not even some carbon copy. It's unique in its own way, and it has its own style, its own vibe. Much like Poppy's record, Someday Tomorrow Maybe expands upon the things that made Lola Marsh's previous record good and stretches it out for one full album. I love this record. I think it's one of the best albums of 2020. And it's a very, very hopeful sign of what's to come from a very talented group of musicians. Yael Shoshana Cohen has a beautiful voice. The fact that English is this woman's second language, yet she speaks it with complete, pristine clarity, says a lot about how talented she is. This album is just great. I think if you love alternative music, especially if you lean towards a lot of folk stuff, you'll get a lot out of this record. So yeah, absolute A tier. Great album. Following that, we've got Perdida by Stone Temple Pilots, which is an absolute S tier of an album. Definitely the best record I've heard of this decade as of now. Nothing has compared to this record so far as in terms of personal impact and how it's influenced me as a person and as a music lover. So, as you know, I'm a fan of albums like Jar of Flies, Year of the Tiger by Miles Kennedy, and pretty much all 3 days of the new records. So, Perdida really isn't anything new as far as acoustic music goes, but despite that, I love this album. I think it presents it in a way that's still different, despite the idea itself not being foreign by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. In fact, I would even say it's my favorite Stone Temple Pilots related release ever. Even more so than some of the stuff they did with Wyland, which is impressive. I think if you had any reservations about Jeff Goots' involvement in Stone Temple Pilots, this album would put that to rest. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece of music. The album played a very pivotal role in me, in my personal life, being that essential theme of the record is losing and starting over again. As you know, I went through a pretty brutal breakup in 2020. I also missed out on a major career opportunity due to COVID-19. But in spite of that, that record always felt cathartic. It always made me feel good. It always made me feel hopeful. And I always appreciated how the album starts with a goodbye with Fare Thee Well and ends with a hello, a new beginning with Sunburst at the end. Highlights are I Didn't Know the Time, which is the most beautiful tribute to Chester Bennington I've ever heard. Years, which is about a crumbling relationship, something I was able to immerse myself into. You Found Yourself While Losing Your Heart, I Once Sat at Your Table, and Sunburst. Yeah, I love this record. I think if you love music, this is something you should listen to, regardless of whatever style it may be. S tier. Absolute S tier, the sole S tier as of now. Following that, we've got Miss Anthropocene by Grimes, which is going to go in B tier. It's in many ways just as experimental as the Poppy album, but I don't think it succeeds at accomplishing what it seeks out to do in the same way Poppy's record did. It's really good overall. I think it's a very interesting experience, and much like Poppy's, I would say it succeeds at blending electronic music with more alternative hard rock. My Name is Dark definitely being the best example of that. But upon re-listening to it, I don't think it's aged the same way. Like Poppy's I Disagree is something I still feel compelled to return to over and over. Whereas Grimes, I would say it pretty much embodies the B tier thing where it's mostly good but not amazing. 4 AM is an amazing track. I especially like Dark Seed or Dark Side. I don't know how to pronounce it, but the song with the Mandarin singer is freaking badass. It's like this cross between Enya and Nine Inch Nails. In fact, I describe the whole album as a cross between something like Madonna with Nine Inch Nails. It's just really good music. It's very interesting music. I think if I was more immersed in this genre of music, it would appeal to me on a grander scale. But in spite of that, I do like it a lot. I know I did get some pretty harsh reviews from other people, but I still think it's great. In many ways, this kind of feels like a an accompaniment to that Blade Runner movie. Both of them, the original and the 2049. Which makes sense, because Grimes is really about that cyberpunk scene. But yeah, this was solid. I'd recommend it. B tier for sure, though. Following that, we've got the 8th album by Five Finger Death Punch, one of the most hated bands of all time. And it's not really hard to see why. In fact, in some ways, the band kind of made me feel embarrassed for even liking this record when it came out, because they did a lot of stupid things around the time this album was released. Mainly with that Living the Dream video, and then their whole approach to the mask thing. Yeah. But in spite of that, I think the music is something that really got overlooked when people talked about this record. It's a good album. It's a great album, I would say. I've been checking out Five Finger Death Punch since 2013. I've known of them since I was in high school. That's around the time they really broke big. And I would say I've listened to every single album from The Wrong Side of Heaven to... Well, I'm going to listen to their new album tomorrow, the Afterlife one. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Afterlife. And... generally speaking, I cherry pick what I enjoy and what I don't enjoy from album to album. But F8 was the first one where I liked it from beginning to end. It's their first record without their original drummer, Jason Hook, and their new drummer with Charlie Engine. And he's a great drummer. I think he fits this band like a glove. He's really solid. It's their last one with Jason Hook. And I feel as though Jason Hook really put his all into his playing here. I don't know how much he had to do with the creative process, but... as a swan song, I think this is a really solid goodbye. It's a really good Five Finger Death Punch album. I know it's like a meme to hate on this band, but it's a great album. It deserves the accolades it got. It was one of the top 10 albums of the year, actually. In fact, I think it was actually the second... yeah, it was the second most popular rock album of this year out of the ones I'm checking out. It debuted at number 8 on the Billboard 200, which is pretty funny, because F8. I think it's supposed to be pronounced Fate, but I'm not going to call it that. Yeah, F8. Anyway, it's a good album. I think if you hate this band, you should give it a chance. Not really because it's going to change your perception or how you... I mean, stylistically, it is very much a Five Finger Death Punch album, but I think it's presented in a way that's very distinct from their other work. And it feels much more refined, even if they would later undo that refinement with their stupid music videos and opinions on conservative ideology. But still, I liked it. Definitely A tier. Great rock album. Next up, we have Gigaton by Pearl Jam, which is going to go in C tier. Yeah, this was not very good. In fact, compared to the last Pearl Jam album, I think it was a pretty big disappointment. And I know I'm in the minority with that statement, and I personally don't care. I've always thought Pearl Jam's hard rock side was the best aspect of their sound, and they stray away from that greatly here. Not that it's completely, without success. I think Dance of the Clairvoyants is my favorite song in the album, and it's very much an electronica song, with a lot of people comparing it to, like, Talking Heads. Aside from that, though, the only things I cared about were Quick Escape and Take the Long Way. Everything else just did not resonate with me. I think Lightning Bolt was a much, much better album, and I would call this a step down from that record. It's Pearl Jam, so it's going to be quality regardless, but as far as how I felt about it, it's, yeah, solid C tier. Had some good moments, but, yeah. Following that, we've got Negative Balance by Godzillionaire, which is an absolute A tier of a record. In fact, yeah, this is one of the best things I've ever heard. And it's also one of the most interesting ones. It's much more in line with something like I Disagree and Misanthropocene than it would be F8 as far as rock albums go. This features former Paw lead singer Mark Hennessy. It's his new band, and well, it's easy to miss Paw. It's easy to get nostalgic for Paw. I don't even really need them with Godzillionaire because they're putting out some amazing material. This is one of the best albums I've ever heard. I would definitely say this is a true album experience. It takes you on a journey. And much like Poppy's album, it's very ominous, as it ends with an airplane recording of a woman instructing you on how to put on a mask. And we know how 2020 went, so really, really creepy ending. In spite of that, oh, I mean, I wouldn't even say in spite of that. Because of that, that makes the album feel that much more special. I know that might seem like it's dating the record, but it really isn't. It's kind of like this foreboding piece of history, like a cursed time capsule. It didn't really hit me the same way that Perdida did, which is the only reason it's not in S tier. But this is an absolute recommend. Like, if you're gonna check out anything, if you've never heard of any of these bands, and you're gonna check out one, or if you just feel the need to only listen to one album I'm recommending to you, it should be Negative Balance. They deserve it, mainly because of their lack of recognition. Ideally, I'd prefer you to check out everything from A tier and above, especially Perdida, but most of these bands already have their time in the sun, or their time in the spotlight. And I feel like Godzillionaire still hasn't gotten that, despite being very innovative, revolutionary, and unique. This Godzillionaire not only added something to 2020, I think they just added something to rock music with Negative Balance. Hard recommend. Fantastic album. Following that, we have a very big letdown. We have Red Light King's Moonshine, which is something that I was really excited for, especially with how much I enjoyed the last two Red Light King albums. Now, it should be noted, Red Light King has never been an album I've loved completely from beginning to end, but I would say I greatly enjoy about half of their albums pretty evenly. And that is not the case on Moonshine. Moonshine is one of the most boring records I've ever heard in my entire life. I do think I was a little bit harsh on it in my initial review. I wouldn't put it in F tier, but because nothing on this album is really insulting. It's more just stale than anything else. But regardless, yeah, this was a letdown. I had high hopes for it. I really love the album cover too, but nah, hard pass. Definitely the most disappointing release of 2020. Following that, we've got One Way North with To Light. So like most people, I was exposed to One Way North through Aaron Scott's performance on The Voice, where he covered Hemorrhage by Fuel. I think he has a very solid voice. I think he did offer a lot to that cover and that song, much in the same way Chris Daughtry did years prior. But his original material, I think it still needs some work to be desired. I was really disappointed when Aaron Scott didn't join Fuel, mainly because I think he could benefit greatly from working with Carl Bell. But in spite of that, his debut album's solid. I would say I like it more than the Pearl Jam record, Gigaton, but barely. It's really good hard rock music. In many ways, it's kind of the opposite of something like I Disagree or Negative Balance, because I would say while those albums are hard rock, and while they present hard rock in a way that it really has never been presented before, One Way North does the opposite. One Way North is playing to the strengths of a sound that's pretty established, being that this is basically a post-grunge record that could have been released in the mid-2000s. But in spite of that, they know their sound, they know what works for them, and I hope they continue to grow. I thought their last EP was fine, but I'm much more interested to see where Aaron Scott grows from here, and I'd like to see him work with Carl Bell someday. In our F tier, we've got the Trapped album, or Crapped, as I like to call it. This album was so pathetic. It was probably one of the most embarrassing records I've ever heard in my entire life. It's funny how, like, gung-ho these guys are, how they like to sell that alpha male bullshit. And they made this record which just reeks of pure estrogen. It even has a Jewel cover, for Christ's sake. And there's nothing wrong with covering pop. It's just this album as a whole is so bland and stale that you couldn't even identify the Jewel cover because everything sounds just like that cover on this album. The song I Want to Want What I Want is probably the most embarrassing song title I've ever heard in my entire life, despite the fact that it actually is the best song on the album. Make It Out Alive is a very ironic song because Chris Brown was talking about how much he loved bullying people in 2020 and how much he got, how he basically just got a kick out of kicking people's asses in high school, people who couldn't fight back, and yet he's making a song called Make It Out Alive, which is about survival. So yeah, I don't really care for the band's politics. This goes both ways. I mean, as you know, I disagree a lot with what Five Finger Death Punch was propagating in 2020, and their album is in my A tier list. But yeah, so don't think I'm just hating on Trapped because I disagree with their political ideologies. I'm hating on Trapped because they suck. This was a really bad album. I don't follow Trapped, but I felt compelled to check them out with all the controversy surrounding them this year. And boy, was that a mistake on my part. I think this album came out around my birthday too, which is probably the worst birthday gift anyone could get. I'm Trapped. Yeah, I'm not surprised it sold a whopping 600 copies. I'm even impressed it broke that. Ugh. Yeah, absolute F tier. Hot garbage. In B tier, another B tier record, we've got the remix album with Grey Days. So Grey Days has basically been milking Chester Bennington's death for a while now. So much that I would even call it shameless at this point. But for what it's worth, this was an interesting album. I did enjoy listening to it. I do think it's a better goodbye to Chester Bennington's legacy than One More Light was, which was just, hot garbage. But it was good. It's a remix album, so I feel like that kind of prevents it being from good as it could be. Mainly because they're fiddling around with Chester Bennington's old school Grey Days vocals. Honestly, I would have rather them have just gotten a new singer and re-released those Grey Days albums as they were, or just remastered them. But yeah, it's good. I don't think it's on the level of something like Hybrid Theory or Meteora, but it's a solid rock album from Chester, and if you're a Chester Bennington fan, I think you'll really enjoy this. Our first and only not played of 2020 would be All For You by Joey Dalto. So I did preview this album. I spoke with Joey once in a Fuel fan page we follow. Joey Dalto was also someone who auditioned for Fuel. So with Aaron Scott and Joey Dalto, we've got two potential Fuel singers in 2020 that put out new music. For whatever reason, he didn't get into Fuel. But yeah, I listened to his work. I think he has a nice voice. I really do need to play this album in full. I remember enjoying it when I previewed it. And for whatever reason, I just never followed up on it. Given my feelings on the new Fuel record, and spoiler for anyone who's still listening at this point, I might make a new video on Fuel pretty soon. I really think I should check it out, and maybe I'll get around to that. But, yeah. Just the first record I didn't play. This is the only album I didn't listen to in 2020. In full, I mean. And I'll try to correct that pretty soon. Another B tier album, we've got the Waterfall II by My Morning Jacket. So My Morning Jacket's a band I've known of since I was probably 13 or 14. Whenever they aired that episode in that American Dad, that American Dad episode that's just about My Morning Jacket, I really enjoyed most of their songs, but I can't say all of them were that appealing to me. I think they're a pretty solid band, but yeah, as far as albums go, they never really hit me completely. And this is a good example of that. Being reversed, I mean. They actually did impact me this year. I really think the Waterfall 2 improves on everything I didn't like about its predecessor album. And another thing I really like about this record is this music was made around 2014, 2015, and it's still very relevant to 2020. In many ways, I think this album captures a lot of the energy that was going on in 2020. It's a good album. Magic Bullet is definitely my favorite song off the record, but Climbing the Ladder is really solid too. I even preferred it to the piece of new material they made in the subsequent year, but we'll talk about that next week. Overall, this is a great album. I think if you like psychedelic and alternative music, you'll really get a lot out of this. So, this would be a great record to be paired with like Someday Tomorrow Maybe and Miss Anthropocene. But yeah, really good stuff. Really, really good stuff. Experimental, avant-garde, relaxing. You kind of get a little bit of everything on this album. I think there's only one song off this record I didn't really care for, but even then it wasn't a bad song. It was just okay. In A tier, we've got The Kingdom by Bush, which is also one of the best hard rock albums to come out this year. I think this should have been Bush's comeback record. It's that good. Like, I can't even believe it took Gavin Rossdale this long to make something this solid consistently from beginning to end. Because I like some songs off the Sea of Memories. I like some songs off, God, I can't remember the, God, I'm forgetting the name right now. What the hell is it called? The subsequent album from the Sea of Memories. Man on the Run, that's it, the gold album. So I thought there was like stuff I enjoyed off here and there from both of those records. Some songs that were really, really amazing amidst an album or albums that I thought were okay. The record they made before this one, Black and White Rainbows, is one of the worst albums I've ever heard. That would definitely be in the F tier if I was doing a tier list on 2017. But The Kingdom, man, this should have been their comeback. I think if this had been their comeback record and you just added like the Sound of Winter to it, then Bush would be much more popular than they are right now. It's just a great rock album from beginning to end. It's a shame that it performed so badly because this is a record that I think adds a lot to Bush's career and basically shows they still have that energy left. It gives me hope for what they're going to do next. And I know they have a new album coming out. If it's not, of course, I don't want the same record, but if it has the same quality that we saw in The Kingdom, yeah, by all means, bring it on. Ooh, anyone who follows the channel will know that this is definitely going to be an S tier record. I'm kidding, it's F tier. This is probably one of the worst albums I've ever heard. So Psychosexual, on the topic of Five Finger Death Punch, is the second Five Finger Death Punch related album to come out in 2020. This is the first album this is the first album by Jeremy Spencer, the former drummer. And I think it's interesting that the one album Five Finger Death Punch made without Jeremy Spencer just so happens to be my favorite. Like, what a terrible start to someone who's trying to establish themselves away from their mainstream band. This album is pure trash. It is laughably awful. Everybody I showed this to thought it was embarrassing. I cannot believe there are people who like this. Like, respect to you, I guess, because this is just, ugh. Oh, God. I would honestly say, like, anything I have to say about this record, just stop listening now and go to my video. That little video I made where I talk about Psychosexual. It pretty much summarizes everything wrong with this band. I know he changed his name to Psycho Sinner after this, and he released 9 albums, none of which I planned on listening to. Not even, like, in the same way I checked out this one. But, yeah, this is genuinely one of the worst albums of all time. I can't even say it's good in, like, an ironic way. It's just terrible crap. The worst offense he made, it's not on this album, but the most offensive thing he ever did was this cover of Sex Type Thing by Stone Temple Pilots. I've never wanted to kick someone in the face more than Jeremy Spencer for basically murdering that song. And I'm not saying it took away my enjoyment of Sex Type Thing. I'll always love STP. I'm just disgusted that someone could misinterpret a song on the level he did. So yeah, Psychosexual. Hard not recommend. Another C-tier album, we've got 10 Years with Violent Allies. Pretty disappointing album, honestly. 10 Years, much like Red Light King, is a band that has been releasing music I've enjoyed, generally speaking, throughout the years. I can't really say there's a single album I like from them from beginning to end, but overall, they have like some songs here and there that I really, really love from album to album. And this was the first one where they didn't have that. I'm being really harsh on this record. It's not an awful album by any stretch of the word. It's well made. It's interesting. I can't say it's very appealing to me, but by no means is it as boring as Moonshine by Red Light King. And musically, this is like the moon and the stars compared to Trapped and Psychosexual. But it is also the first 10 Years album that doesn't really impact me the same way, or that doesn't have any songs that impacted me the same way their prior ones did. In fact, I really liked, I think about half of their last record, the How to Live as Ghosts one. And of course, songs like Fix Me and Miscellanea and Backlash or Dancing with the Dead. Like, they've released so many songs throughout the decade that I really love, but yeah, this was a pretty rough start for them. Better luck next time. I know Fair to Midland they had the bassist from Fair to Midland in their band for a while. I don't know if he's still in the band, but I would, I would hope they could make something along the lines of Fair to Midland pretty soon. It was okay. Ooh. I'm even impressed we had like this many bad albums in one year. CMFT was the debut solo album by Corey Taylor, famously known as the lead singer of Slipknot and Stone Sour. I would say this album is laughably bad too. The title track is the worst song on the album, but it's also the best song on the album because it's the only song that I really remember. This genuinely feels like a collection of unused ideas throughout Corey Taylor's career. And I don't even want to hear people use that as an excuse, because Mark Tremonti's debut solo album, All I Was also a collection of unused ideas throughout his career. But in spite of that, he made it refined. He gave it a polish, a shine that made those songs strong. Corey Taylor, this really feels like he just left a bunch of crap that should have never been released. This should have never been his debut solo album. This should have just been like a digital-only release of B-sides because it just sucks that much. I can't wait for his new Slipknot record. I need something... Corey Taylor's a pretty talented guy. He makes good music. But I just need something to wash the taste out of my mouth from this piece of trash. I always thought it was funny like how much Corey Taylor talks about rejecting fame and rock stardom. He's even challenged guys like Kanye West and Fred Durst before. And on that Slipknot song, All Out Life, he condemns mediocrity, so he says, and then he releases something this shameless. Ugh. This is embarrassing. Just embarrassing. Garbage. Hard pass. And our final A-tier album of the decade, of the year of 2020. God, I hope this isn't the end of the decade for me. We've got Posthuman Survival Horror by Bring Me the Horizon. Now, Bring Me the Horizon is a band I used to hate. I thought they were a band for posers when I was in high school, and I always found their song titles to be obnoxious and cringy. So I kind of checked this album out of morbid curiosity, or this EP out, and man, is it freaking solid. It is one of the best EPs I've ever heard, and it shut me up, man. Like, Bring Me the Horizon is a great band, and if you've been on the fence about them, I would definitely recommend checking this out. My favorite song they did was Kingslayer with Baby Metal. Another example of technology blending in with hard rock music is on this song. Kingslayer had every reason to be awful, and it wasn't. It was amazing. And I think that's a testament to how talented these guys are to where they can make something like that work. The song they did with Amy Lee is very good. Parasite Eve and Teardrops are also really solid songs. Teardrops in particular, having a heavy Linkin Park vibe to it, which isn't surprising, as Bring Me the Horizon has pretty much sung the praises of Chester Bennington and Linkin Park before. And in some ways, I think their singer, Oli Sykes, I know his name is Oli. He should have been the new singer for Grey Days. I feel like that could make Grey Days a pretty interesting band again. And it could also, maybe gradually warm me up to Oli's music. Because, yeah, when I say I hated Bring Me the Horizon, believe me, I hated them. But, no, this is a great album. It's a very interesting EP. I keep calling it an album. But, yeah, it's solid. It's one of my favorite albums of 2020. It has some of my favorite songs of the decade. And, if you love rock music, I'd recommend it to you. It does some things new. I don't think it's as boundary pushing as I Disagree, but it has its moments. And it makes me excited for... Well, I think the band did release something recently. I didn't check it out. Or I need to check it out. Maybe I'll do that in the next video. But, yeah, it has me curious for what Bring Me the Horizon will do again in the future. And our final album of 2020 is a posthumous record by Chris Cornell called No One Sings Like You Anymore. The best thing about this album, or what my favorite thing was his Guns N' Roses cover, actually, of Patience. I think he does a very unique and beautiful rendition of it. But it's kind of hard to completely get into this record, if for no other reason, because it's nothing but covers. And because it's a bunch of unfinished demos, these are songs that Chris Cornell wasn't entirely ready for the public to hear yet. And it's very apparent on some tracks. I don't want to accuse Cornell's estate of cash grabbing, but it does kind of feel like that a little bit. There's no reason why this release should not have been included with that humongous Chris Cornell box set that came out 4 years ago. But it was good. I think it's very interesting. If you're a Chris Cornell fan, it's an absolute must. If you're a casual fan, then I'd recommend the Patience cover, as well as a few other covers on here. The Prince one was pretty good also. But yeah, it's fine. And that's pretty much it. I think that's all we've got for the year. I don't have any other albums besides this one. So, like I said, I feel like this is just an abridged version of the videos I made prior. Instead of having like 30 minutes per album, or per category of album, I just put them all into one. This did come out surprisingly long. I've been here for about half an hour. But yeah, let me know if I talked about any albums you liked on this list. Let me know what you think of any of these albums, if you ended up checking them out, which ones appealed to you, or if your opinions differ from mine. Hey, maybe you love Trapped and Psychosexual. You know, maybe you could provide an opinion that I haven't seen. I doubt I'm going to change mine, but it's worth a shot. So as usual, I'm gonna make probably 2 more of these. I'll make another one for 2021 next week, and then either by the end of the year or sometime next year, I'll do another one for 2022. But thanks again for watching, guys. As always, be calm, be cool, be collected, and we'll see you later.